All right, guys, welcome back. We are on episode 8 of the Speed Up and Get Your Hits podcast. Excited to be diving into another episode, as always. I'm Billy Barton with SpecTrain. I've got Nick with Velox Training Group and Brennan, Vortex Edge, with me. All our information is down below. Also down below, right underneath the like and subscribe buttons, is going to be a new link for the where you guys can go drop a question specifically for the podcast. If you guys have special things that you want to drop, you think would be good for us to talk about, we always try to do an answer a question block here at the end of the podcast. There's a specific place where you can do that now, if you guys are interested. Tonight we are diving into a full-on deep dive dry fire episode. Obviously, we've talked about dry fire quite a lot, I'm sure, throughout previous episodes that you guys have heard about. But I still, man, I see people all the time, get questions all the time. It's like, hey, yes, I get it. You guys are saying we need dry fire, but I really don't know, like, what I should be doing. Like, do I need to go, subscribe to this dry fire program? Or, like, how do I figure out, like, what it is that I should be doing in my dry fire? And because it's entirely possible to dry fire and not get better as well. And so there's those folks as well. Like, hey, man, I'm doing the dry fire thing you told me to do, but I'm not necessarily seeing the progression. What am I doing wrong, right? And then in addition, there are the folks that think they are crushing it, but I know the three of us sometimes see all the dry fire videos in the gram and it just hurts our soul for one reason or another. So we're going to dive into some of these topics tonight. We're going to talk about specific drills you guys should be doing, how you guys should be doing skill development in dry fire, just sharing some tips and stuff that have been helpful for us along the way. And really excited to dive into this with you guys, Nick and Brennan, and get some thoughts from you guys as well. And hopefully I'll learn some stuff along the way as well. I thought before we dive into specific drills and kind of talk about the progression and different things you can go through, we'd set the stage with a couple universal principles I think are super important and relevant. The first one is just, man, when you are dry firing, you got to be honest with yourself. So I'm interested to get your thoughts before I take all the thunder, fellas. Talk about being on. How do you be honest with yourself in dry fire? What are the main places you see folks failing to be honest with themselves in dry fire that show up when they get to the range?
100%. Where the sights were when they pressed that trigger during dry fire. 100%. Like, you see a lot of people doing draws.
Yep.
And they will, like, they'll have a really aggressive part time, whatever. And they're measuring success by the click of the trigger rather than when they see their sights before that second beep. So it's super, super important to have the visual piece of dry fire in that aspect, right? Especially 100%. On draws.
Yeah, really good. Really good. Yeah, that's the whether it's the draws, whether it's a target transition, especially see folks doing that on full courses of fire, just kind of ripping the gun through targets, and not only are you not being honest with yourself as far as what part time it is that you're actually hitting, but you're actually ingraining bad habits, right? So if you're not seeing progression in your live fire times, it could very well be that you're actually getting worse because you're just ingraining bad habits of pulling the trigger regardless of what your sights are telling you in chasing that part time, right? And we'll talk about part times and different things as we get to specific drills, but yeah, so I think where your sights are, massive part of it. And really just tracking what your sights are doing is really the most important part of dry fire in general, I think. Another one that I see all the time is, we'll talk about isolation here in a minute. I think isolation is obviously one of the huge advantages of dry fire is you can really isolate every little thing that you're doing and narrow it down. But like reloads are a great example of, it's I can't tell you how many guys I've shot with, right, that just rip these sub-second reloads or whatever it is in dry fire on the gram all the time and can never hit a reload on a stage, right? Like, or it does not look the same, right? And so the question becomes, hey, are we being honest with ourselves about yes, we can isolate. The point of isolating is to, I think, learn the skill, but we have to explore it in the context of compound course of fire as well, because there are things that I can do in that static, completely isolated slamming reload situation that are not quite the way I'm going to do it when I'm trying to run around a barrel or whatever it is on the range is different, right? And so I think being honest about what works where and where, trying to push for that extra hundredth on the part time versus pushing for consistency, that kind of thing, super super important, right? And that's where I think too, sometimes the social media is a great influence, I think, in sometimes getting folks to dry fire, right? Putting out the good work and so forth. But when folks start dry firing strictly for social media, that can get you in trouble,
Big time.
It's like, meeting that flashy part time is not necessarily setting you up for success in whatever your particular goals are, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Anything else? What you got, Brennan? I see you thinking about stuff.
Yeah. So I think another one that's big is being honest about your grip. I think so. I've noticed this in my own practice. So let's see, 2021, I guess I did not do that much shooting. Live fire shooting. I did a lot of dry fire. Ammo was hard to get, and I was too poor to buy it. All that shit, right? So I was just dry firing, and for the most part, was maintaining my skill. Getting better a little bit too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I would notice was when there was long gaps between live fire sessions, which I know a lot of people are in that same boat, right? My grip would be kind of not so great.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't be disciplined about even I think Bill, you pointed this out to me in a match one time. My grip wasn't consistent through my course of fire. So I would grip tight for hoser targets where I knew I needed to go fast, and when there was some steel plates or something like that, maybe at a little bit of a distance, my grip would loosen up, and I was thinking about my sights, my trigger, wasn't really thinking about anymore. And I think for some people, especially starting out with that dry fire, man, you got to be really honest about your grip. I like to tell people grip that gun the same way you would if you were giving me a bill drill from high ready at 5 yards. Grip the gun like this. Okay, are you ready? All right, cool. That's the grip that I want you to get every time out of the holster when you dry fire. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do because the gun just doesn't move when we dry fire, right?
Yep.
So it's hard to be honest about that. I think if we do though, it helps us iron quite a few things out and saves us a lot of grief on the range.
Great point. And I think something to consider there too, right? Because of how important grip is. I talk to folks that are like, man, I'm dry firing 2 hours a day, and I'm like, okay, well, that means you're not doing it right, because at a certain point, you really can't do that. Or at least I can't, right? Even after all the years in shooting, I haven't built it up to where I can really, for 2 straight hours of solid dry fire, grip the gun properly, and and be driving my eyes properly and so forth. I definitely did those super long sessions when I was first starting out and doing, trying to figure out how to do the manipulations of the gun and so on and so forth. When we're talking about skill development, you're really trying to crush the gun in your grip and so forth. There's fatigue is a thing, and there is a clock on how long you can really do that, properly as well. So definitely consideration for folks in that regard. But yeah, I see what you're talking about. I see what you're talking about all the time. I actually just was doing video reviews for the competition class I did 2 weeks ago, and you can see it in the I have close-up videos of every shooter doing the billy drill standards, right? So shooting bill drills from 7:15 and 25, and it's look at the way the gun is moving at 7, and look at the way the gun is moving at 25, right? And it's your gun is not moving at 7, and then at 25 the gun's just going pew. It's what are you doing, right? You're not gripping the gun back at 25. And so, yep, super, super good point.
Dude, that's why I usually recommend people dry fire twice a day. Like do 10 to 15 minutes twice a day. It's a lot better. And I think that if you try to do those, like if I do an hour, my support hand is like 100% torched. And it's because you can get a whole lot more reps in dry fire in an hour than you can live fire in 3 or 4 hours.
Correct.
Definitely.
Yep. 100%. Yep. 100%. Okay. And there's just no breaks for loading mags and pacing targets and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
Let's talk about his really quickly. We touched on this already, but there's always going to be the guys when you see different drills, and there's truth to some of what the haters say, right? But we have to take everything in measure. Isolation versus compound training, right? So there's always going to be the guy that's, it's obviously become super popular now to hate on like 1R1 drills, right? As an example, well, there's not a lot of training value there. And again, do I think that's the best drill you should be doing all the time? Probably not. But there's always the guy, no matter what drill it is that you're doing, that's like, oh, well, try to do that, while you're rolling under a car, around a mine, or whatever. And it's like, okay. I think there's some value to, obviously there's value to isolating skills. We also need to build it up in context as well. So talk about that a little bit, guys, if you got any thoughts. What do you think the value is, or how do you go through that kind of progression of isolating skills and then maybe building it back up into more compound stuff, or how do you approach that?
And I isolate stuff to see how things are supposed to feel at first. Like, I think that is 100% the place to start. I think once you have a solid understanding of how things should feel, like, for instance, how your grip should feel, stuff like that, then add the draw to it, right? How can I get fast at a draw and keep a really, really consistent grip? Things like that.
It's great.
That's
you can't learn how to draw if you don't know how your grip should be to begin with, right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
100%.
Yeah, and that's the most, like, if we're talking about the draw, like, the most important part of the draw for me anyway is going to be the grip. Like, I could give a shit how fast the first shot is if my grip sucks.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty much right there with you, Nick. I find that the isolated work that I do is either technical work where I'm figuring out the technique, right, and I'm making tweaks, or I'm exploring something and trying to do it better, or just do it right in the first place, or it's speed mode, right, where I'm trying to figure out how to do that thing faster, right, and that's when I kind of like to do isolated work, versus compound skills, right, or compound drills. For me, that's more of let's see if I can put this together. And I might do a little bit of speed mode with that. But for the most part, it's, can I put this together at a decent speed? It's hard to put numbers on it, but like a 90% speed, right? And can I do it consistently? Do those techniques that I worked on isolated kind of work together in a compound drill, right? So I kind of use those compound drills almost like a match mode type dry fire, where I'm just trying to, all right, let's see if I can put it together. Right. I don't generally do a lot of like compound drills in speed mode unless I'm trying to like really break a specific PR on like a 2R2 or something, like, really specific. But that's kind of my approach.
Nice. Yeah. So my perspective on it, I think, is exactly the same as you guys. I think that in dry fire, obviously, like you guys talked about, isolating things down to the individual skills is really good, but man, you can isolate it even further. I mean, there's I give you just one brief example just to get super kind of granular with it, right? Like transitions. I can isolate something on the range like man, I'm not leaving the target soon enough. Right? After the final shot on that target, I'm not leaving it soon enough. It's almost, once you've identified that, it's like, man, I'm not going to spend all day on the range working that. It's like, I'm going to go back to the house, I'm gonna get in dry fire. And when I discovered that, I remember first discovering that years ago, and I wanted to isolate leaving the target quickly, and also the process of resetting and prepping the trigger properly, right, as I'm coming into the next target for the first shot. So I would literally, in dry fire, pull the trigger, rack the slide, but keep the trigger pin to the rear, timer on delay, right, and use a timer to replace the stimulus of the shot going off. And so, of course, on the beep, I was just coming off on the trigger onto the next target and just kind of drilling that over and over again. And sure enough, go back to the range, it's like you made progress, right, with that kind of a concept. So isolating stuff down like really, really granular like that absolutely can have a big impact in your shooting, and it lets you do that without sacrificing time and ammo on the range. So let's dive into kind of dry fire progression, right? So I think we just start off, brand new shooters, maybe picking up guns for the first time, that kind of stuff. And let's kind of go through and just talk about what folks should be working on. I'd love to hear some specific drills, maybe as we get especially more advanced specific drills you guys like to work on, things that are different that you don't see all over the place, things you see people doing that we shouldn't be doing. We can just kind of round robin it. I think obviously just to set the stage, typically what folks start with right off the bat, when you're just learning stuff, is going to be what we'll just categorize as manipulations, right? Basic stuff, loading, unloading, draws, grip, reloads. How do I get the gun to function, right? Is that pretty much where you guys recommend folks to start off with as well?
Yeah, 100%. Like for reloads, like where I start everyone off at. Like I will set a par time that I know for a fact that I can get the fresh source of ammunition to the mag well itself. So there's two beeps, right? So beep, and then we'll have a par time. So what I'm looking for on the first beep is to get the magazine just to the mag well, and then on the second beep, drive it home and acquire a sight picture. And I think that breaks down reloads pretty well. And then what I can do, like once you start, becoming comfortable with that par time, then you can just lower it, keep, taking a tenth off and gaining more and more speed. And you're also building a really, really consistent reload. I think that building consistency, and I think you guys would agree too, like that's what we're trying to do in everything. Like I don't care how fast it is, as long as it's like if it's not consistent, then who cares?
Well, let's speak to that though, right? So when obviously I think you would agree, Nick. When you're trying to find a new way to do something faster, when you're trying to break through a plateau, like, man, my draw right now is at 1 second, and I want it to be at 0.8, right? So I have an idea. Here's some things I want to try to do differently to see if they can get me to this new part time, right? When you first start doing it, it's not going to be consistent.
Sure.
You're just looking to see if it works first, right?
Sure.
And then build consistency from there, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. So that would be finding a specific technique, right, to help gain speed. But yeah, if you're only getting, say for instance, draw, to make it easy, right? If I'm only trying to knock 2/10 off on my draw and I can only do it once out of 20 times, then I probably should try something different.
Sure.
In terms of technique, because just solely trying to go faster is not going to get me there.
Agreed.
Right.
Yep. I think it was an interesting thing you brought up. So why do you have folks stop, or just for the benefit of folks listening, in the reloads, stop the load at the mag well?
So I think that's the most critical portion, right? You can be really, really fast, but if you accidentally throw the magazine, or if you get stuck on the mag well and the magazine doesn't actually go in, then it's going to be really slow. So I'm a big fan of that pause reload. I think Rob Epiphania. I can never say that dude's last name.
Epiphania?
Yeah. I'm gonna call him Rob E.
Okay. Robbie.
Rob E. He talks about the pause reload, and I think for me that was really, really big when I was trying to get good at fast reloads. I chatted with him a lot, and he's like, dude, if there's no pause, like, how do you know for a fact that the magazine is actually going to go in? And so I build that pause into my dry fire reloads.
Yeah, so I think to start with, a huge benefit of it is if you are just trying to stuff the mag in there, right? For a lot of folks, just get insanely frustrated because they're missing it and they don't know where they're missing it. They don't know why they're missing it. They just know they're missing it and they can't figure it out, right? So when you build the pause in, if you miss it, you're going to see exactly how you missed it and where.
100%.
Right? So I think that's super valuable just in and of itself right there. And then like you're talking about, whether it's obviously Rob talks about the pause loads when you watch the man do a reload. There's no pause there, right? It's just a little bit of speed modulation, right?
Yep.
But if you just try to do it the way that he does it right off the bat, it's not going to work. You have to start with the pause, and then you can see, okay, how much can I kind of round that corner off before the wheels start falling off, right? So yeah, I think there's huge benefit to rushing the mag to where the mag well is, and then with that kind of little bit of confirmation there, finishing through the second phase.
That's one of those things where it's like, so that pause, right, where the first round disappears in the mag well, that's like the part that requires the most finesse, right? The rest of the reload is hand coming off the gun really fast to a magazine, right? That doesn't really require that much finesse. I kind of need to use strength and speed to do that, right? Same thing with getting it up here, right? And then, but once I get there, I've got to align something, because once it's disappeared into my mag well, I can let this mag go, and it just requires pushing up, right? And so I feel like that's one of those places where the technique has to be there in order for you to accomplish anything. I think a similar thing with the draw would be like establishing a good grip on your gun while it's still in the holster, right? And if you can't do that, everything is going to be messed up from there, right? Or getting your support hand on the gun in a consistent spot, and building that grip early enough, right? And so those are the places where I would, like in dry fire, I would figure out, okay, how exactly is my hand coming on to and meeting this gun? And where exactly is it touching, and how does it roll, and where is my grip fully set in, or where does that mag, what am I seeing when that mag actually enters the mag well? Things like that is the beauty of dry fire, in my opinion. We can stop, rewind, do it again, until we're figuring out, okay, that's exactly what that looks like. It's those little finesse points that make all the difference. My opinion.
And I think too is figuring out what is the most important part of the gun handling skill that I'm trying to accomplish.
Yes. Yep.
Like for a reload, to me, the most important part is getting that fresh source of ammunition into that mag well. It is not dropping the slide, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think, oh man, you didn't drop the slide, and it's like, yeah, dude, we're trying to practice the most important part of the reload, and not to mention this is super easy to do. Right. And I don't think that takes much practice, but getting that magazine into the gun really quickly can be freaking hard, man, especially on a lot of the guns that don't have mag wells, like that Smith & Wesson that Brennan has, really, really hard. These Walthers that I shoot, there is no mag well. So, practicing
you need to take a Dremel to that thing, bro. Good.
I definitely do to my carry optics gun.
Yeah, fair enough. To be fair, right? Like the dropping the slide thing, I mean, definitely takes a little bit of practice at the very beginning, but it's like, hey, once you do that 10 times out of 10, like you've got that, right? You can go back and confirm it's still there on occasion if you feel like it, right? But yeah, that's one of those things where it's like, learn how to do it. Right, and then, but when that's the easy part, that's the least important part. Move on to the hard stuff. For sure, agree 100%.
Take that part of the process that's giving you trouble, and rep that out in dry fire. Figure out the right technique. Figure out how to do it consistently. Figure out what you need to see.
Yep,
that's it.
Yeah. Okay. That's the one last thing I think I'm maybe interesting on reloads. So, do you guys practice reloads with empty mags?
No.
No, no.
What do you do?
For a long time, I was like hesitant to even like tell people that I did this, but I'll be honest, I don't.
Everybody was doing that though.
I don't care, right? I stuff the mag completely full, take 4 or 5 rounds out of the top, and then stick dummy rounds in the top. To me, one of the most important part of safety, like in all of my classes, I always tell people, like, look, man, it's not all guns always loaded all the time. It should be changed to knowing the status of your gun at all times.
Agreed.
'Cause if I know the status of my gun at all times, then we're fine, right? Because we don't always treat all guns as if they're loaded. Dry fire being one of them, right? I don't want to shoot the walls. I'm pulling the trigger on the wall. I don't want to, and so knowing the status is huge. So I'll dry fire with a full mag with 4 or 5 dummy rounds in the top. To me, I'm 100% safe with that stuff.
Yep. Yeah, I'll do
Agreed.
the same thing. I'll either have a full weighted dummy rounds, like these rounds that just don't have any primers or anything in them. Those work pretty good. Or I'll do the same thing as you, just stick 5 dummy rounds on the top. And one thing I like is that the feed lips in the magazine don't get caught on the mag well. It's also, I think, kind of unrealistic to come up with an empty mag. The weight 100%. Of it makes a pretty big difference. One of the things that I see people do a lot of times when they miss their reloads, myself included, is I will start opening my hand and changing kind of the elevation of the nose of the mag too early or too late, right? Generally, it's too early. I start opening my hand and that mag dips, right? That mag behaves differently with a weighted mag than it does with a empty mag. So I think it's pretty important to practice them with weighted mags of some sort. The other thing is, like, in dry fire, I don't ever chamber rounds. I don't chamber dummy rounds. I don't chamber anything, right? If for some reason I was working on slide lock reloads, I could do that, but I would have only dummy rounds in the mag at that point, just because I don't want to take that chance. But I can't. That was probably the first time I've chambered a dummy round in like a year and a half. I just don't practice that anymore. So as long as you're not chambering something, man, like, just stuff some on the top, and use a weighted mag.
Yeah. So by dummy rounds, these guys are not talking about, for the record, like snap caps or whatever. We're talking about actual like weighted rounds, right? So if you know anybody that reloads, ask them. They'll make you some. We're just talking about like real bullets with no primers, no powder in there, right? Doesn't make a substantial difference in the weight, but everything's going to work the same. If you don't know somebody that reloads, hit up Outdoor Dynamics or somebody. All these reloaders probably have all the components except for primers right now. So they'll probably be more than happy to sell you some dummy rounds.
I bought a bunch on eBay for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean, worst case, hit me up. I'll sell you some. I can make you some. It's really not that hard. So I just because I make them myself, I generally have full dry fire mags of dummy rounds as well, and that's what I go with for sure. Makes a big difference on the reloads, no doubt about it.
One last thing on the reload thing with a full mag. If you do it with an empty mag, it's not realistic, because the feed lips sometimes, like if you miss the magazine well itself and the feed lips split on the side of the gun, that's not realistic. Like, that doesn't happen when it has bullets in it.
Yes.
So that's pretty much the main reason why I do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very good. Okay, cool. Let's talk about draws a little bit, right? Because that's obviously, I think, when folks start off, that's probably the number one thing that people spend a lot of time working on, and I think that folks don't necessarily do it. And a lot of times when you see it, the way they get the most value out of it. So talk a little bit, guys, about how do you think folks should actually be going about the process of dry firing a draw? Nick, you already talked about, obviously, super important, number one thing, making sure how do I draw this gun in a way where I consistently get a perfect grip, or if there's any such thing, as close to perfect as I possibly can on the gun.
Sure.
Right? What else do we think is important? How should folks be going about it?
So how does your dot land, or your dot or sights, right, for people that still use those? how do those things land on the target? Where are they landing on the target?
Yes.
Are they coming in kind of like at a zigzag? Are they coming in high right, high left,
Mm-hmm.
whatever? And then are you having to drive them back down? Your sights should be landing exactly where you're looking, and they should be landing there softly. Kind of like if you're throwing darts, right? And you're staring at the bullseye, that thing should just land exactly where you're looking.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, why?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing.
Yep.
One drill I like to do for that a lot, right? Especially for folks, a lot of folks that have spent a lot of years on irons and then switch to dots and have problems finding the dot, right? Have been steering the sights onto the target, right? Mm-hmm. And so, what I tell folks to do, because obviously it changes the way you do that. You really can't do that with a dot, right? So, what I tell folks to do is, pick a really, really small, precise target, whatever you're using in dry fire, line up on it, look at it, get your natural point of aim, everything perfectly centered on it. Look at it, close your eyes, draw the gun, present it, open up, and see where does your dot land, right? And you can do that to see, okay, when I'm not steering it, I'm going way off to the left every time. So there's something mechanically I need to fix to make sure that I'm actually landing, roughly centered every time. And obviously the goal, I think, is to get to the point where, you can do that, where 10 times in a row you can close your eyes and draw, and it's just right there. And that is absolutely achievable. Obviously, if you're doing low light or nods or whatever, you're not going to see the gun coming up. So, super, super important. I think that's a great way to train that, is by closing your eyes from the draw and seeing where you're ending up. Have you guys ever tried that, or you got any other ways you work on that?
Yeah, I actually do that like live in class.
So
like,
okay.
I'll close my eyes and draw, and it'll usually be about the same time, and it's still in like the A zone.
Oh, you just shoot with your eyes closed?
No doubt. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I love that. That's cool. That's a cool demo. I like that. Mm-hmm. Very good. Yep. Super good way to train that. When it comes to speed, right? I think there's different ways to approach it. Nick, you already mentioned, hey, be careful about the whole mashing the trigger thing, because you can really cheat that. And it becomes hard to be honest with yourself. So, one of the things I encourage folks to do is just not even pull the trigger. Like if you're trying to hit a part-time on the draw, at least when you're starting off on it, to see if what you're doing actually works or not, don't even pull the trigger. See if you can see your dot on the target before the part-time, right? Like that's all it is. It's just getting the gun up and seeing, okay, did I see my dot on the target before the part-time? Once you're doing that, consistently, if you want to practice pulling the trigger at the right time, so you get the timing of that down, that's a separate thing that you can work on. Right? That's generally what I encourage folks to do, is just worry about seeing it in time. Is that kind of what you guys do as well?
Yeah, 100%. So, like in my classes, I go through a whole draw spiel with dry fire, and I don't have people touch the trigger at all in the very beginning. Towards the end, what I'll have them do is just get to prep, right? Because if I can see the sights and I'm at prep before that second beep, then I'm doing something good. I think another really, really big thing that people kind of make a mistake on when they're trying to go fast on the draw is they're trying to make the draw fast on the last half of the draw rather than the front half of the draw, right? Yep. So get to the gun fast, get your grip really quickly, and then allow the gun to just lift rather than getting to the gun slow and then just yanking the gun out. And the reason is, if you just yank the gun out on the last half of the draw, you'll see the gun kind of bounce. There's no consistency there in how your dot's going to land on the target. Like if you tried to shoot a bill drill like that, it'd be shit. So,
agreed.
Shit is not good.
No, not usually. Not usually. Go ahead, Brennan.
Oh, I was just gonna say. So, I also kind of subscribe to the same method of the most important thing is seeing my dot. I didn't used to always be that way. I've kind of come to see that later on. Because one of the things that I struggled with for a long time was like the stimulus for me to shoot, right, on a draw is what I see, right? And so if I'm seeing a dot and I'm not pulling the trigger, I oftentimes have a hard time distinguishing between when I first see that flash of red in my window and what I end on, which is a crisp, clear dot. And I think some people who have maybe have a really bad habit of over confirming the dot need to actually rep out some draws live fire, which goes against what a lot of the dry fire ninjas say. But you do need to rep out some draws live fire to start learning how to respond to the stimulus of a flash sight picture. I think if you do that in live fire, combine that with being honest and pushing speed and just seeing your dot, not necessarily always getting on the trigger in dry fire, that is a really good recipe for figuring out the draw. I think that if you always just do one or the other, it leaves something on the table.
Sure. Good. I know we could go through, we could talk about anything else you guys think interesting that you want to hit on in terms of that kind of beginning stages of learning various manipulations. What else do you think is important for folks to work on other than draws and reloads? Anything in particular?
Yeah, looking to the center of the target. Like, dude, I can't express that enough. Like, be super, super picky with where your eyes land. Like, don't just see the color of whatever it is that you're shooting at. See it in detail and drive the sights to the center. It's so important. That's going to transfer over into live fire, and it's going to feel like easy mode on live fire if you've been doing that through dry fire.
That'll change the way you shoot.
Yep.
I think something else that I talked about this earlier, right? About being honest with your grip. One of the best drills for that, in my opinion, is Ben Sager's trigger controlled speed. I think that's maybe one of the best value for the money dry fire drills that you can do, especially if you're starting out. But even now, like, I do that every time I dry fire. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's essentially starting on target with your dot on the target, full grip, and either starting from finger just prepped on the trigger, or just touching the trigger, or even sometimes they'll have you even start not even on the trigger at all. And on the timer, just pressing through that trigger as quickly as you can, and looking for no dot movement or minimal dot movement. That's going to give you a really good audit of your grip, because if you're actually pulling that trigger as quickly and aggressively as you can, that will, if you don't have a good grip, disturb your sights. So we start people off with that almost immediately in pistol classes. And I tell people, if you want to figure out how to shoot straight at speed, you've got to do that in dry fire, to the point where your grip, like, it's a self-correcting exercise, right? Because if you see your dot go left, you're a right-handed shooter, you probably aren't squeezing enough with your support hand. And change something until that dot quits moving, right? And I think that's a really valuable one. And it does force you to be honest with your grip if you're looking and kind of reading that information that the dot's giving you.
100%. Yeah, I was going to bring that up as well. So back it up for a real quick second. So I think past kind of manipulations, we try to get into just skill development and isolations, and that's where I was going to bring that up as one of the main things now as well. I'm doing that in my Pistol 1 courses as well. And a couple of things I think are super important for folks to understand. Number one, it is a grip diagnostic drill. It is not a technique.
Yep.
Because folks get sometimes after that drill, it's like, oh well, I can just hammer the trigger that way now. And it's like, okay, no, that's not quite what we're getting at. But yeah, so essentially the idea here, and this is still I think somewhat a controversial idea, but regardless, a good grip, right, can cover up a multitude of sins in your trigger control. It really, really can. And so we want to have just the gun locked in a vise as much as possible. So that drill, the idea of, hey, as soon as I hear the beep, in under 2/10 of a second, I'm essentially going to slam that trigger to the rears as hard as possible, and then I'm going to see what the gun does. This drill, you can confirm it in live fire, but it has almost no value in live fire. This is a dry fire drill because you are going to actually be able to see what are my sights doing without any stimulus of the gun actually cycling, right? Especially if you have a dot. This is super, super valuable because it's just going to make it so readily apparent what's the gun doing when I hammer the trigger like that. And so I think that's absolutely the best grip diagnostic. I hear people saying all the time that you can't really train your grip or learn how to grip the gun better in dry fire. And it's like, yeah, you can't with that drill for sure. And it's
like as
super,
it pertains
super good.
to like recoil control.
Well, I mean, obviously recoil control and that kind of timing is a little bit of a different thing, right? But yeah, I think the drill you're talking about there as a grip diagnostic can absolutely help you learn how to grip the gun better in dry fire for sure.
Yeah, I find if you're doing that right, you're doing it correctly. You're doing the drill correctly, where you're aggressively, quickly pulling through that trigger. If you have that same grip in live fire, you'd be surprised at what you can get away with.
Mm-hmm.
With a far less than ideal trigger pull, right? And we actually do that. So part of the live fire exercises, we'll do that at like 15 yards on a head box, and like, all right, hold the dot in the credit card and slam that trigger, right? And it was like, oh shit, like I'm all in the head box. But yep, you should be, right? And it's pretty interesting, but a good one to do in dry fire. Try to hit it just about every time.
Yeah,
John,
go ahead.
I actually do a combination of that drill with like once I've gone over that specific drill, because I do the same thing, and then trigger prep. What I'll have people do, we'll get back to 25 yards, and then just have them hold a dot in the head, and then prep to 90. Like I yell like I want 90. Like if guns are not accidentally going off, you're not prepping enough, right?
Right.
I'll have them prep to 90, and when I blow the whistle, I want you to smash the trigger like you mean it. And we do that 10 times. And, dude, very, very rarely do we have any misses outside of that head box from 25 yards.
Yeah, that's the cool thing with that drill, right? Because you can do it from a trigger pull where you're just touching the trigger and pressing through, or you can do it from the prep and be still just as aggressive through. You can even see I have some hand movement there myself. But once you clamp that other hand on, you can do that from a prepped trigger or a not prep trigger, and that kind of covers your trigger presence. It's pretty cool.
I just completely smash it because I'm a turtle, and I need to learn how to do that at speed without the gun moving.
Excellent. I love it. Yeah, definitely a huge drill that more folks need to know about and be doing, for sure. What are some other good ones? What are other good things in my mind when we get to this stage of skill escalation? Right, I'm thinking about things like, obviously trigger control, grip, transitions, movement, all this kind of stuff. We start working, in kind of this second phase, I think, of dry fire development. What are some of your favorite things you tell folks to do? Favorite drills.
So with transitions, right? Just like anything else, I feel like you should start off trying to see and feel what it looks and feels like. So like with a transition, you go super, super slow, find the center of one target, press the trigger, move your eyes to the center of the next target, and then drive the gun to exactly where you're looking. And it's super important to drive the dot to where you're looking and not go, oh, hey, there's the dot, bring your eyes to the dot, and then drive it to where you were looking, because I think a lot of people do that. So, yeah, just driving the dot to where you're looking, and you don't have to do that really fast. Just get used to driving it to where you're looking on the target and be very, very specific with how the dot is arriving. And again, I think one of the biggest things that people do with that is they'll be looking at one spot, and then when the dot shows up in their vision, they start looking at the dot and trying to drive it to where they were looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you can isolate it if you want even further, right? You can literally just not even worry about like two targets, like just be like, okay, gun's over here somewhere, and I'm looking at this target, and then on the beep or whatever I decide or whatever, man, I'm just working on that ability to actually just bring the gun right to where I'm looking, right, and have it land right where I'm looking. Like you said, what you're going to figure out pretty quickly is like, man, the way to do that is not by throwing the gun over here, right? It's not quite how it ends up working. So, yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to transitions, you know, that's huge. Just isolating each part of the mechanic. Starting with coming into the target, getting the gun to land there, and then escalating to that idea of, okay, as soon as I pull the trigger or pull the trigger twice or whatever it is, getting my eyes off that target really, really quickly and landing on the next target just as precisely, and landing on the next target just as precisely, right?
I think there's a big misconception with transitions and how to do them quickly, which may or may not have stemmed from like Instagram and YouTube shooters, right? But I have no hate for the man, right? But Lucas Botkin, right? When he transitions a gun, it's like boom, and he just pushes that gun like it freaking owes him money, right? And my question there is, what the hell is your dot doing on that second target that you transition to, right? And I think if someone was really honest about that, right, he's going to get a lot of overdriving, and he's got to correct and bring it back, which is simply wasting time. Something that I like to talk to people about is, hey man, when I do a transition, even if it's a fairly wide transition, let's say from here to here, right? How much time do I actually gain by muscling the gun as hard as I can versus just looking and bringing that gun over very controlled? And like what Nick was talking about with the draw, right? If we should see that dot arrive softly on target. If I don't see my dot arriving softly and precisely in the middle of that target, I'm doing it wrong. Like I'm using too much muscle, right? And I find transitions is so much of a precision visual game than it is anything else. Like if you can look and be disciplined about where you're looking, all you have to do is move your hand from point A to point B. That's it, right? And if people would just start doing that, I think they would gain back a lot of time in their transitions. It takes a lot less muscle than I think they think it does.
Yeah, it's just sliding the gun to where you're looking.
100%.
So I will muscle the gun on really, really wide transitions, but I'm also giving it that like 90-10 principle too, right? So like a super wide transition, like I will snatch the gun 90% of the way and then allow that last 10% to kind of just fall into place. Because otherwise you're just going to overdrive it, or you're going to drag on a Charlie or a Delta.
Do you break the gun in when you do a really wide transition, like 160 degree?
No.
You leave it out?
No, I just leave it out.
On a 180, I do.
On a 180.
Yeah, I find it to be a lot faster for me, for whatever reason, and I find that the dot gets there a lot more.
I find that on those transitions, if I just swing my head, right? I swing my head and my eyes, that momentum is enough to bring me to that target without overshooting.
For sure.
Obviously, like the driving for you works. It does not work for me. Like I go.
Yeah.
Woo!
So I was kind of waiting to let you guys talk a little bit. So honestly, some of what we're talking about here is stylistic as well.
Sure.
You can to separate it from transitions for a second. We could talk about the same thing what we talk about with draws. I didn't bring it up because I didn't want to nitpick too much, but you know, there's differences in mentalities in the draw, right? Some folks have the idea of like, hey man, I just want to like, as I get to that last 30% or whatever, I'm just gonna drop the dot in there and bam, like right when the dot lands there, nice and soft and precisely where I want it. And there's other guys like, I'm gonna get the dot out there, clean it up, and then press the trigger, right? And sometimes that it ends up being the same thing in the end, and sometimes certain things end up working better for certain people, I think, and other things work better for others. I don't know. I also think that at a certain point, I think there's no denying that the thing we're talking about now, which is like, hey, not muscling the gun, being easy moving the gun, is definitely the easiest way for people to get like super proficient very, very quickly. Do I think like Eric Graffel always does it that way? Like, no, I don't. Right? Like, I think at a certain point, like when you're like, okay, it doesn't matter that that's really, really, really good transition. I need to take 200s off this thing. Like, you have to start pushing and you have to start like getting superhuman with it. Right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
So, and I guess what I'm getting at there, JJ talks about the 90-10, right? And then I hear guys like, Juancic and others talking about, the 70-30 on a transition, right? Like really modulating at like the 30% when there's 30% of the transition left. And it's like, okay, I think it's a stylistic difference. It is, do I want the gun to float onto the target like really, really softly to where I can just pull the trigger as soon as the dot gets there? Or do I want the dot to rush to the A zone and then clean it up if I need to, right? I don't know. I don't know if you can 100% say like one way is right or wrong. We're going off on a rabbit trail here, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's going to work for different styles for different shooters. Like I can tell you 100% that if I'm waiting on that 30%, it's not going to go well for me.
Yeah.
Because I hear that time ticking in my head, right? Like I feel like sometimes I'm like like if I was a labradoodle and you were playing catch and you throw the ball in the street, I will 100% get hit by the car. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to wait. So like, I know me personally, I have to figure out how to get there quickly and then settle the dot like on that last 10%. But if I wait any more than that, I'm going to throw something. It's not going to be good.
Yep.
It's lack of patience, probably.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe you just want to be fast, man. There's nothing wrong with that.
That too.
Nothing wrong with that. So yeah, we got a little bit nitty gritty there on the transition stuff, but that's the kind of stuff you can explore, right, and figure out. Hey, on this particular size of transitions with this particular size of target, right? Because I think size of the target, and different people do it different ways. Joe Farewell said something to me last year that I'd like literally never heard before, and I was like, I think that's kind of crazy, but I'm gonna try it, which is he's like on a transition, he's like, he said he doesn't look to the center of the target, he looks to the edge of the target. And he so like, in other words, if I'm transitioning left to right onto a target, I'm gonna snap my eyes to the left edge of the target, and I'm gonna drive the dot to where I'm looking, but it's obviously going to overdrive a little bit, so it'll just kind of drift in the A zone, and it'll be right where it needs to be. And I was like, that doesn't sound right, but you're pretty dang good, so I'm going to try it for a minute, But,
wow.
People do things different ways, and you'd be surprised at what works for folks sometimes. So, but yeah, dry fire is where you can play around with that stuff, see what works for you. For sure. Cool. What else? Movement's a big one, right? I think I tell people all the time, shooting on the move. Like, I have in my competition class, I have a super long block about moving and then shooting, like entries and exits and all that kind of stuff, and then have a very, very short block about shooting on the move. It's like I can tell you one or two things, but like the way you get good at shooting on the move is like by shooting on the move, right? But you don't actually have to burn a lot of ammo. Like, I mean, what I do a lot of is just like walking around the house with my finger like completely off the trigger. Just how still can I keep my sights while I'm walking down this hallway, or while I'm walking through my backyard, or while I'm whatever it is, right? And you can do it in depth, moving laterally. Like that's where I tell folks to start for like shooting on the move. It's just like, first of all, just figure out, hey, how low do I need to get in my stance, or whatever you're playing around with. How does it impact the way that my sights move on target, and how still can I keep those moving? And then we can worry about timing shots later, I think. What do you guys do for shooting on the move?
The exact same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Because not everyone's built the same, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I tell you to get low, getting low might mean something different to everybody. And not everyone can get low. So, I just have people just try different things. Like, hey, do different stuff with your knees and with your feet, Like for me personally, when I step down, I try not to have my knees locked, because if they're locked, I see a jiggle in my dot. Mm-hmm. But every time I step down, I try to have a knee bent. Just try different stuff like that, and your sights are going to tell you everything that you need to know about how you're moving.
Yep. 100%. 100%.
Yep. Same thing here.
All the other stuff, obviously don't have time to get too deep into the techniques of everything, but obviously, you know, entries, nexus, moving around stuff, coming into shooting positions, whether you want to work around cover or concealment or just vision barriers or whatever you want to, you know, figure out how to work around. You can start adding all those things in, I think. Isolate, you know, again, starting with isolating particular parts of the movements, figure out how you want to do it, and then work it into compound drills. Now, as we start talking about this is a super interesting concept I want to ask you guys about. So, let's say you're starting to get into these longer courses of fire, and you know you've got 4 or 5 targets, and you want to go through and do it like a stage. If you're shooting like a stage, as an example, in dry fire, what do you guys do with your trigger during that stage?
So I do it differently now than I used to. This is it's pretty interesting. So for a long time, I would manipulate the trigger, and like a lot of triggers, except block triggers, mostly, I can kind of get an articulating trigger after I get that initial press. Mm-hmm. So I'd get my click, and then I would just bang, 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 right?
Yes.
What I discovered was really hurting me, and this took me a long time to figure out, was at matches, I would go to my walkthrough, and I would visualize how fast I was engaging each target because I was thinking about trigger presses versus what I just needed to see on that target. So on this little target over here, you know, maybe like really close to the ground or whatever, 3 yards away, I do not need to see much. And so I can almost not visualize or move my finger kind of fast enough to think about that. And I was setting these unrealistic cadences that if I got off of them would just completely screw me up. So I quit doing that almost completely. If I'm putting together like a little mini stage for dry fire, I don't manipulate the trigger really at all. Sometimes I'll just kind of come to a prep position on that first target, and then I'll just kind of have my finger on the trigger, just touching it, and then just seeing my dot there, and move through it that way. I didn't used to be that way, but I started to find that it was like really messing with my head when I go to do like a stage, actually shoot a stage, because essentially my walkthrough is dry fire, right? And it was really messing me up. And I was thinking too much about the speed at which I was going to pull the trigger on targets, and that was just not super successful for me. The only difference I would say is like, and that's not to say I don't ever pull the trigger, but when I'm doing something like in match mode, I generally don't.
Yeah, so I think you highlighted exactly the issue that I wanted to bring up, and this is something I think will be super interesting to a lot of folks, right? What most people do in dry fire, as an example, if they're going like, hey, I'm going to shoot 2 per target, is they simply imagine a cadence that they expect they would shoot that target in live fire, and they pull the trigger twice at that cadence, right? Yeah. Because realistically, if I'm shooting a target reactively, which, you know, I think we talked about this recently, Nick, as well. Like, a lot of people are using lots of really, 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 really small targets for dry fire, which means you should be shooting them all reactively. And if you're reach a level where you kind of understand the difference, then what determines when I pull the trigger again is going to be my sights, right? And so in dry fire, since my sights aren't leaving, I should be smashing the trigger twice at 100% speed on every single target, if that's really what I'm doing, right? Which that's not a great habit to build either, right? Just always smashing predictive splits on every single target. And so the alternative is essentially, well, how fast do I think I would shoot this in live fire? And then I pull it twice at that speed. And so what you're training yourself to do is to look at a course of fire, come up with a cadence in your head, and then shoot that cadence, regardless of what your sights are telling you. Which seems like a really, really bad precedent, right?
Yeah.
Now, like you said, Brennan, I'm in the same boat. I'm not saying I never pull the trigger in dry fire. I definitely do, especially when I have set up like predictive sized targets.
Yep.
If I am dry firing on an open target at 7 yards, then I have no problems simulating a build drill because I'm just going to hammer that trigger 7 times as hard as I possibly can, and that's an okay habit to have, right? There's a few things that I do on courses. Sometimes I literally won't even have my finger on the trigger, right? Finger just up on the gun, and all I'm doing is focusing on the vision part of it, right? Just getting my eyes to the target, right? And just seeing, does the dot land there? And I will intentionally stay on the target longer than I think is necessary, just to focus on that part and then think about what I'm doing next, and then I do the next part, right? And also I stay on there longer because I am not a turtle, I'm a hoser, and so that's not a bad habit. The other thing that I will do as an alternative is just rush to a prep on every target, right? So as I come off one target onto the next, come off on the trigger, and try to rush to as good of a prep as I possibly can. And then maybe I'll have, a lot of times I'll set up like the last target in the array is like a tiny piece of steel or whatever, and that'll be my last target. I'll actually squeeze through and break the shot on the last target in the array. Something I like to do. What do you do anything different, Nick? What's your thoughts, man?
Yeah, so I will just touch the trigger, but like I'm touching it. These are Walthers, right? Once they break, they just kind of do that number there.
Yep.
But I'll just press it as fast as I think I can shoot the given size target at that distance.
Okay.
That's it. I think the time to see like how fast you can pull the trigger on a certain target is not really in dry fire. It would be like shooting doubles, walk back doubles.
Agreed.
So.
Yeah, and I think, Nick, the thing, obviously the thing for you is although you dry fire a lot, you're supplementing it with a lot of live fire as well.
Yeah, I shot 1,200 rounds today.
Right. So I think where folks the issue that we're talking about with the cadence thing, that gets really dangerous for folks that are like dry firing for 2 months at a time and not live firing, right? That's where those habits.
Yep.
And the unrealistic habits in dry fire really start showing up, I think, a lot more, right?
I think the thing that you need, and we started off the podcast saying this, right? But the thing that you have to be thinking about when you're dry firing kind of a complex drill or exercise, you have to be thinking about what kind of sight picture do I need on that target. Right? And it's not going to be 1-to-1, right? Like I'm not, like, my sights are not going to look the same transitioning off of one target onto the next, because my dot never actually lifted, right? And it's not really coming down an arc. It's almost kind of flatlining. But I'm thinking about what that final sight picture needs to look like and about how much time I need to give it, right, on that target. And so everything comes down to that vision piece, which is, like I said, right back to where we started. What do I need to see, right? What are my sights telling me? And I get a lot more value out of, okay, so I'm doing this drill. I have a wide transition. I come over into that wide transition and my dot arrived in the delta, right? I go, oh, that is not cool, right? And I'm going to think more about how can I get my dot to land in that alpha quickly than I am about what speed I'm going to engage that target at. And I found that when I applied that to like my walkthroughs, matches, it changed how I shot. Like it leveled me up straight up. So I'm a huge believer in that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And it's the question I think there, and this is kind of getting into, I guess, the final evolution that I think about in dry fire progression. Generally, most of the top shooters that I know, when you ask them, what are you doing dry fire, they just say vision. Right.
Yeah.
After you've kind of progressed through a lot of the other stuff, not that you ever really fully abandon all the other stuff, but what you end up in is like vision is the limiting factor to performance. You have to see faster to shoot faster, and what that really looks like, what you talk about, Brennan, on a wide transition. Okay, my dot landed in the delta. More likely than not, it's because your eyes landed in the delta, right? Like realistically. And so what we do visually in shooting, it's pretty freaking unique, as far as what's required. because we have these big kind of wide open targets, and this just that practice of snapping the eyes and trying to not have our eyes bouncing around the target and then landing on the middle, but just kind of knowing where the target is out of the peripheral and training the eyes to be able to snap right directly to a very small specific spot on the target, which doesn't actually exist. You have to imagine it's there, right? Essentially. Man, that's tough. And that's really what separates, I think, some of the elite shooters from simply great shooters, right?
Yeah, because it's having your vision go in, out, in, out, in, out, to like in on one specific target and then out for the transition.
Yeah. Yep. It's and that's part of what I think is missing in a lot of folks' dry fire as well. If we want to start talk about getting to the kind of more elite level, we have to start figuring out a way. Okay, I'm not just going to simulate farther and closer targets by having different size targets, but I'm actually going to figure out a way to build some depth into the arrays that I'm shooting, so I can practice that zoom in, zoom out of the eyes, because that's a huge part of your visual acuity in shooting. It involves that depth change and everything else.
100%.
As well. Yeah.
And it's like, dude, I can promise you that if you're looking, like if you're dry firing and you snatch your eyes to a target and the dot lands on the target that you're looking at and you could still see other targets, you are not looking at that target in as much depth as you should be.
Yes.
Yep.
That's such a huge deal. And that's what I mean by your eyes need to come in, out, in, out. So like visually focus really hard on one target, drive the dot to where exactly you're looking, and then bring your vision back out. And then find the next target that you're going to drive it to. And try to make that subconscious.
Yes. I love it. Yeah. So what kind of targets are you guys using in your dry fire?
Man, I use humongous like stuff. Picture frames, mirrors, doesn't really matter. Okay. I'm not a huge fan of using small stuff because I think it takes away the piece of like finding the center. So I will just use bigger targets. Anything around the house doesn't really matter to me. Like the smallest I'm going to go is a freaking light switch, man. I don't want to go any smaller than that.
Mm-hmm.
I use like either 1/3 or 1/6 size IPSCs, like little dry fire targets, or the scaled down ones that you'll see at matches sometimes. I used to just dry fire with anything and everything. Honestly, I don't see a huge problem with that. What I changed to those specific dry fire targets for was visualizing the spot on the A zone that I want to hit, with different partials and things that I'll see at a match, because those are actually a lot of times it's like a standard partial, like so visualizing the center of the available target, or visualizing the spot on the A zone that I want to connect to. So that's why I use those. I think that's helpful for me, but it's not necessary. And it's pretty specific to like a match setting, I would say.
Agreed. Yeah. So I definitely have found that helpful for me in dry fire is using the actual targets that I'm going to shoot on, right? Mm-hmm. As far as being able to find the spot for sure. Open targets, partials, all that stuff, right? Just learning where your eyes land on those specific targets, personally, I think is super, super useful. If that is like a big driving part of your training, is going to be being successful on those kind of targets. Obviously, if your primary drive is real world stuff, then change that up, right? And use more realistic pictures of real people, because that's a huge. We used to part of the drill we used to do for our critical applications courses with target ID is we would have so we start off the day, we have these printable anatomy targets, but they have scoring zones and all this kind of stuff people can see, and of course got dudes are drilling big holes in the center of the targets and so forth, and then we take those exact same target stands with the exact same printed targets and we throw a t-shirt over them and have them shoot that, and all of a sudden it's just like the shot patterns just go whoosh, right? Because you can't see a particular thing to aim at anymore. And so I think there's definitely value in looking at those kind of targets, or whichever you're watching on TV or whatever, and figuring out how to snap to a specific spot and disciplining your eyes there as well. Definitely value on that for sure. So I use, like you said, I use the reduced targets. I've got a bunch of the. This is a pretty cool one actually. Have you guys seen this? This
That's cool.
Dry fire swinger, huh?
Yeah, I've seen that. That's
go
pretty
fast,
cool.
go fast, don't suck. I got a bunch of his stickers and different things like that. I also use Dry Fire Ninja. Pretty cool application you can use if you hook up to your TV or if you got a big screen or whatever. Actually lets you set up, like, you can throw like USPSA classifier stages up there and barrels and swingers and all kind of stuff and dry fire that. There's also videos you can look up on YouTube where they have swingers and different things you can train on. All that's pretty fun. But yeah, this is an interesting thing. I thought I would ask you guys. What about we'll call specialty skills? I'm interested to hear your guys' strategy, how much time you spend on these things, like unloaded starts, switching the gun to the weak hand, turn and draws, maybe malfunction clearance, whatever you want to throw in the category, kind of specialty skills, things that you want to know how to do but are pretty like super like rare use stuff, right? How much time are you guys putting into those? Are you just kind of doing like an occasional verification check to make sure everything's still there, or how do you guys work with those kind of things in?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I probably do more of that crap than anyone else. Just because, dude, I have this. I don't know. I don't want to suck at anything. So like,
yeah.
I am constantly like, man, wonder if I could do this weird shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do it. Unloaded starts. I don't know, man. Probably once a week.
Wow.
Single hand stuff. Every other day.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Admirable.
It is. It is, man.
I have practiced unloaded starts maybe like 3 times ever. And yeah, I'm not very good at them.
Yeah.
Also. So there's that. Single hand stuff I practice. I definitely practice that. Partially because we teach stuff like that in our curriculums, partially because almost every classifier that I can think of that I've shot in since I've been up here in Wisconsin has had some pretty heavy one-handed stuff. And man, if I can like shoot alphas like at a decent pace, like not fast, but like at a decent pace with my left hand, I'm like in really good shape, like compared to everybody else.
Yeah.
Maybe not for the classification system, whatever. But like compared to like beating everybody else, yeah. So I think that's an easy way to gain back some points for sure. But like I don't really practice my turn and draw that much. I probably should. Like I said, unloaded starts not really. I do practice like that like a transfer to the weak hand because that's something that I know I suck at and have gotten burned by before. But I don't do a whole ton of it. And generally when I do that stuff, I actually do it in live fire, to be perfectly honest.
I guess kind of the way, so the kind of just interesting to hear from different folks. We have kind of approached it as like over the years I've taken like one thing at a time that I was interested in as far as specialty skills, like turn and draw or whatever. And essentially I was like, man, I'm going to work this until I feel like I'm world class at this thing. Right? Yep. And then I'm essentially going to drop it. Right. And it's like maybe once a quarter for me or whatever. It's like, okay, I'm gonna hit my turn and draw on a part time and make sure it's still there. Right. But for that kind of super rare use stuff, I want to have kind of a high level of consistent skill at it for what I'm doing, but it's not something I'm going to work on every day because I don't really care to take 100th off my turn and draw, right? Like just for me personally. I think how valuable all those specialty skills are is going to change for you as an individual, right? If you are somebody who doesn't carry a weapon mounted light, you carry a handheld only. Well, guess what? Single-handed shooting is going to be way more important for you than it is going to be for me, who never carries that X300, right? Not saying it's not important for me as well, but it's going to be way, 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 way more important for somebody that's going to probably be depending on a handheld. So, analyze, what you're doing. If God forbid you carry an unloaded gun, then an unloaded start's gonna be super important for you, right? God forbid if you carry a Springfield, then maybe you should practice malfunction clearance a lot. Just different things. I'm sorry to all my Springfield buddies out there, but
I'm not sorry.
Yeah, no. Honestly, my boss is a huge Springfield fan, so I have to throw that out there as much as possible. But anyway, so just interested to hear what you guys thought about that. I think it's been good, guys. I think a lot of helpful stuff there. Covered a lot of good stuff in dry fire. Any other thoughts? Anything important that you guys want to cover before we move on?
No, but I thought of the question for the question of the week. If
Cool.
we have time for more than one. So.
Sure, absolutely. I will circle back to that. So very good. Hopefully that was helpful, guys. Dry fire stuff. If you guys have any follow-up questions, like I said, there will be a link below. Feel free to drop those. We'll make sure to hit them up on a future episode. But hopefully that was helpful. If it was, definitely share it to folks that need to know how to dry fire more better. This week in shooting, I'll kick this one off. Had an interesting couple weeks, right? Came off of Area 6, have done some additional training, and it was interesting, right? Because where I've shifted my training, I think, over the past year or so has been off of my strengths, which is the super fast hosey stuff, and on to more of the 35-yard partial stuff, right? And so it was super interesting going back to an Area 6 match where there was no difficult shots in the whole match and it was all up close, super fast hosey stuff, and having to remember some of that, right? So what I decided to do and what I thought I would talk about is kind of local match strategy for folks that are using USPSA to help you become better shooters. How do you approach local matches, right? So I don't shoot every local match the same. Some of the local matches I try to treat them like major matches, and I really do try to score as well as I possibly can for the match, right? To test, where's my balance of speed and accuracy? Where's my balance of risk management versus aggression? Right, those kind of things, and you need to do that sometimes. Other times, I'm trying to get better. I'm using matches as a training exercise, right? Sometimes I'm gonna go in here. I'm gonna really, really, really try to shoot an accurate match. Other times I'm like, man, I'm gonna really try to full send it. This week I decided to full send it. I said, man, I'm just gonna go in and be super, super aggressive. Try to push my confirmation levels, farther than I normally would. See what happens, right? Predictively, it was interesting. The first few stages, man, I threw, I think in my first 4 stages, I had a total of 4 mics for those stages, right? Which was pretty much what I was kind of expecting to see, right? Definitely, but again, because that was the mindset I was going into before, I wasn't super disappointed. I was like, okay, what are my learning points from those particular targets? What did I do wrong on those particular targets? Because it wasn't just pulling the trigger too fast, right? It was something else. It was, man, I tried to move way too aggressively while shooting that target due to its level of difficulty, or it was, whatever it was, right? And so tried to modify things as the match went on, control that aggression. Ended up the last 3 stages. I think I won all 3 of those by at least 20%, right? So it was like, man, if you can hook up and you lock that aggression in, man, it turns out pretty well, which is cool, which is pretty cool. So anyway, I thought I would throw that out. Interesting for folks to think about. How can you approach those kind of tests differently and push different things? One of the things that I always did, even on the matches for locals, when I was first starting off, I tried to always use what I perceived to be GM strategies. So, and as an example, if there was a risky situation, I would to the best of my knowledge, right? Because you don't always know. And I'm like, man, how would JJ shoot this, right? And that's what I would try to do. And guess what? A lot of times I fell flat on my face, right? Starting off. But that was super, super valuable because now I know, hey, here's something that I need to go work on, right? That exposed an area of weakness. That's definitely a mindset for me. I think a lot of times on locals is like, okay, what should I be able to do here? If I really should be able to shoot it this way, well, then I'm going to shoot it that way. And I'm going to see what happens. And if it goes wrong, I'm not going to blame it on my plan being too risky. I'm going to blame it on me sucking, and I'm going to go not suck anymore because I'm going to work on that, right? So I don't know if you guys had anything interesting thoughts to add on that, but just thought I would say, I think local matches is not always about winning. It's not always about putting your best possible scores up. You can shoot them different ways, and get different kind of value and learn different things from matches depending on how you shoot them. What do you guys do?
I'll be honest, man. I go into all the matches like I just want to crush everybody. I don't know if I tried different. I don't think I tried different shit. Like
Okay.
I'm just like, because I'll set like stages up at my house quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of use that as practice, and then use the local match because I pretty much only shoot local matches. To see if like what I've been doing is working.
Yeah, I think it's different for different people, right?
Yep.
So like I think in Nick's scenario, right, if he's not actually getting to a bunch of majors and the matches he goes to are mostly just locals, like once a month, Nick?
Yeah,
but you're
maybe.
But you're also shooting a lot, right? And you're setting up practical shooting type stuff. Then yeah, I say go in there and just go into execution mode and see if you can put it together.
Yeah, great point.
I know some people who like shoot tons and tons of local matches, like one a weekend, and then they go to every major match ever, because apparently like they don't have jobs or anything, and like they do really well, and they use local matches as practice, and it's all practice to them, and they don't really care how they do, and then they go and pressure test that at a major. Like that works for them, but like that does not work for me. Because like I do not have that much travel or time off to be able to go or money just to go shoot that many matches. So I'm kind of like you, Nick, man. I try to treat those as like execution mode. I have in the past like tried to use them as like let's try something different, and I think the results have been more frustrating than helpful. And so I think I've gotten to the point in my training now where I can explore that other stuff in training and not walk away like, oh man, that was a frustrating range day, of just like, okay, that was really interesting. I'm really glad I tried that or whatever. Or like, hey, that didn't work at all. And I don't feel like I have to try that at matches, at locals anyways.
Yeah, great point. I think right. Every situation a little bit different, and how many matches you're getting to. I get to a lot. I'm not gonna lie. So, and with the number of majors I'm shooting anymore, I care less and less about actually winning locals.
Yep.
Unless somebody in particular shows up that I'm like really want to try to go after or whatever. So cool. What else? You guys do anything else interesting this week? Anything else you wanted to share before we get to Brennan's question?
Not really, man.
No. I just shot that match and
just being lame, shooting 1,200 rounds a day. No big deal. Just doing your thing.
Yeah.
You working on anything in particular, or just burning ammo?
No, stuff that I saw myself doing at the last match. So I won stage 2 and stage 3.
Yep.
And then after that, I kind of like I felt like I just like got overly confident and let off on the gas, and wasn't particular with where my eyes were lit. Like I saw it in videos, and it just like son of a gun, man. So I need to set up longer stages at my house. like longer stages, trying to keep focused the entire time instead
That's
of like, yeah, because like I said, man, like I'm like the dog that you're playing fetch with, where I will run out and try to catch the ball before it lands and get hit by a car, right? And so, like for me, if things are going really well as I'm shooting, you know, an array or whatever, like I'm thinking in my head, this is going really well, and, instead of, hey, what's next?
Right.
And that's what I should be doing. Fall in love with it afterwards, not during. So, yeah,
That's fine.
it's something that I do, and it drives me nuts afterwards. Because I'm like, dude, it's so stupid that you did that. So, trying to make it subconscious to not do that, and always be, you know, moving on to the next thing.
Love that. Yep. Really good. All right, Brennan, what's your awesome question you came up with?
All right, so it's not an awesome question, but it's a question that I get asked a lot.
Okay.
And I think it gets asked a lot in pertaining to dry fire, and not a lot of great shooters, I feel like, speak up against this. So,
Okay.
I recently addressed this in like a questions answered dry fire podcast thing for Vortex, right? And it was pretty interesting, all of the responses that we got. What do you guys think about laser stuff, laser training tools in dry fire? Because we just did a whole podcast on dry fire, never talked about laser stuff, never talked about any kind of systems, dry fire mags, any sort of like dry fire tool other than shot timers. Thoughts?
Yeah, this might bite me in the ass, but
Yep.
I'll be honest, man. I think it's all fucking retarded. Like especially the stuff that like, okay, I'm gonna strap this to my pick rail, and it's gonna tell me how I press the trigger. So how does that help me with live fire, and how does that help me at speed? Because who the hell wants to go slow? Laser stuff. Should we be looking at the laser, which 100% is going to happen if you have a laser? I don't think that's the right idea. I think you should be looking at the center of the target and driving dots there. If you have a laser, you're going to be, at least for me personally, and I know this from like shooting night vision stuff, like I feel like I'm a cat with the laser, like I'm watching the laser bounce up and down instead of driving my eyes and then driving the laser. It is 100% harder for me personally with a laser than it would be to just look through an optic. So I would be really careful with what you strap to your gun, man. I would not become reliant on any of that stuff because it will not be there in live fire. And understand what it's doing for you in dry fire, right? Things that tell us how we're pressing the trigger, right? It's super easy to get a really, really easy trigger press, right? But can we do that at speed? And that's what we should all be caring about. Whether you're a competition shooter or a defensive shooter, I should be able to slam on that trigger at speed and have relatively accurate shots. And so think about what you're strapping on that thing, and is it the right thing for what you're trying to accomplish?
Yep. I pretty much agree. I've tried all the things. I think the one I get asked about the most frequently is the Manus X.
You said it. I didn't want to say it.
That's fine. I'm gonna say it. I think it's
ridiculous.
I think it is absolutely worthless for accuracy training in any kind of practical sense. The only thing that it can measure is how still was your gun when the trigger broke. It can't tell you whether or not you hit anything. And if you're doing anything dynamically, right? So, I mean, if I, as an example, on the draw, if you draw and pull the trigger aggressively on a 7-yard target, it is going to give you a terrible score every single time, regardless of what you hit, because your gun didn't sit there super, super still as you pulled the trigger, right? Same thing on a transition. If I transition on the target, pull the trigger, and nail that alpha dead center, it's still going to give me a terrible score. So, super worthless for that. The draw analytics that it gives you are interesting, but I'm not sure they're particularly useful. So it does have a thing. It can tell you some interesting things. Like it actually has a pretty interesting number on how soon you react to the beep. Just as soon as it detects any motion in your body anywhere, whether it's like the gun actually moving or not. That's an interesting metric. But again, like I think you can probably kind of tell that for most folks, but maybe for somebody that is having troubles with that, it would be helpful. It can tell you, how long after the beep it took before your hand actually touched the gun, and then how long it was before the gun came out of the holster, and all that kind of stuff. Again, it's interesting to see. I'm not sure it's particularly actionable if you really understand the good technique to begin with. The laser stuff, there's exactly one time I think there's some value, and that is for iron sight shooters that are trying to learn target focus.
That might be. Yep, I've never thought about that one.
Because if you're trying to learn target focus with irons and dry fire, there's essentially no way to know if you're doing it correctly or not, unless you use airsoft. But that's not super accurate at distance anyway. So I think there's some, especially if you're trying to do it dynamically, shooting in and out of positions with all hard target focus with irons to be like, okay, am I actually doing this right or not? There may be some value there in that one particular situation, but other than that, yeah, I don't see much.
Yep. I mean, that's pretty much exactly what I said. I said that on the Vortex Nation podcast. I also named the Mantis. I was like, it's useless.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't quite say that. I said it might have some uses for some people, but I don't know any high level shooters who have a use for it.
And see, right there's the answer, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yep.
If you don't see dudes like JJ or Matt, like people that are
who are winning,
shooting for a living and they have to win.
Yeah.
Like if those dudes don't see the value in it and you don't see them using it, it's probably not worth it.
I'll put a small caveat. If they aren't sponsored by the company and they don't see the value in it, yeah, there's probably
there you go.
Because some of those guys you named actually use those things or claim to use those things, but
well,
yeah,
direct deposit is
it's a powerful motivator, I gotta say.
It sure is.
Yeah, very good.
Cool.
Okay. Cool, guys. That was a lot of good stuff. I think that was I almost said that was a banger, but I don't think I want to steal that catchphrase. But that was a good one. That's a good one. Anyway, thanks for being here, guys. If you've made it this far in the episode, thanks for listening. Again, drop questions below if you got anything you want us to address on the next podcast. Information for Nick, Brennan, and myself all down below. Look these guys up. Follow them on their socials and so forth. And if you get a chance to train with any of us, I know it would be worth your while, and they would appreciate it. We'll see you guys in the next episode.